There is a name most people who grew up in a church know before they know almost anything else about the Bible. Isaiah. They heard it at Christmas. They heard it at Easter. They heard it in the sermons that moved them, and the hymns that made them cry, and the passages read at funerals when someone needed words large enough to hold the weight of the loss. Isaiah is that woven into the fabric of Christian worship that his words have become almost like furniture, present in every room, necessary, and almost completely invisible. That is the problem this video is about. The problem is what familiarity does to extraordinary words over time. It makes them safe. It makes them comfortable. It makes them into the kind of thing you can quote without being changed by, recite without being confronted by, sing on a Sunday morning and walk out carrying without ever once feeling the full weight of what you just said. Isaiah himself warned about this. He spent decades speaking to a people who heard him and did not hear him, who listened and did not understand, who kept their rituals and missed the entire point. And the haunting thing, the thing that should stop every generation cold, is that God told Isaiah this would happen before Isaiah said a single word. Go and tell this people. God said, hear and hear, but do not understand. See and see, but do not perceive. That was the assignment. Speak to people who would not really listen. And Isaiah did it anyway. For decades, in a city that was simultaneously deeply religious and deeply broken, in a culture that knew all the right words and had forgotten what the words were for. Sound familiar? Isaiah is among the most quoted and echoed prophetic voices in the entire New Testament. He shaped the way Jesus talked about his own mission. He shaped the way the early church understood grace and suffering and hope and the future of the world. They did not just borrow a few lines from Isaiah. They breathed him. And yet, ask most Christians what Isaiah actually taught, and you will get the familiar lines back. The Christmas passages, the suffering servant, wings like eagles. Ask them about Isaiah's economics. Ask them about Isaiah's politics. Ask them about what Isaiah said to people who were fasting and praying and keeping every religious obligation while their workers went unpaid and their neighbors went hungry. Ask them about the passage where God says he cannot stand their worship anymore. Not because they stopped going to the temple, but because they never stopped going to the temple. The silence that follows those questions is its own kind of answer. Every generation learns how to quote Isaiah safely. This video is asking something simpler and more uncomfortable than that. What happens when you stop quoting him and start actually listening? 24 teachings. They will not arrive as a list. They will arrive the way Isaiah always arrived. Inside a story. Inside a crisis. Inside a moment when someone thought they already knew what God wanted and discovered they had only memorized the safe parts. Pay attention to when the number comes, because by the time you hear it, the teaching will have already found you. Across centuries of history and heartbreak and exile and return, through kings who failed and empires that rose and a city that burned and a people who came back from the ash, all of it pointing at the same question. Are you actually listening? Or have you learned to quote him safely? Let us find out. Picture the city. Jerusalem in the 8th century before Christ is not a ruin. It is not a city in obvious decline. It is a city with a functioning temple, a working priesthood, a full calendar of religious observance. The festivals happen on schedule. The sacrifices are offered. The prayers go up. By every visible measure, this is a nation that takes its faith seriously, and God is preparing a lawsuit against it. That is not a metaphor. The opening of the book of Isaiah is structured as a legal proceeding. The heavens and the earth are called as witnesses. The plaintiff is God. The defendant is Judah. And the charges are not what most people expect when they think about prophetic condemnation. Isaiah does not open with a list of pagan practices or foreign gods. He opens with something more unsettling than that. He opens with a picture of a people who have forgotten who raised them. I reared children and brought them up, but they have rebelled against me. The ox knows its owner, and the donkey its master's manger. But Israel does not know. My people do not understand. An ox knows where it belongs. A donkey knows who feeds it. And the people of God, the people with the temple and the priests and the centuries of covenant history, do not know. That is the first line of Isaiah's ministry. Not a dramatic vision. Not a thundering condemnation of some spectacular sin. Just a quiet, devastating observation that something basic has been lost. To understand what Isaiah is walking into, you have to understand the world he is walking into. The 8th century before Christ is one of the most dangerous centuries in the ancient Near East. The Assyrian Empire is expanding with a brutality that ancient sources describe in terms that are difficult to read even now. They did not merely conquer cities. They dismantled them. They deported entire populations, scattering them across the empire to destroy any sense of national identity. Resistance was not just futile, it was catastrophic. Judah watches all of this from the south, and Judah makes the calculation that most people under that kind of pressure would make. If the empire is coming, you need allies. You need horses and chariots and military agreements. You need the kind of power that can actually stand against the kind of power marching toward you. This is the world Isaiah steps into. Not a world of obvious irreligion. A world of desperate religiosity combined with an equally desperate pragmatism. A world where people are praying harder than ever and trusting God less than they realize. And from the very first chapter, Isaiah names exactly what has gone wrong. The people have not stopped worshipping. They have started worshipping something else while performing the rituals of worshipping God. This is teaching one, and Isaiah will spend 66 chapters refusing to let any generation escape it. It is easier to hear Isaiah condemn idolatry, the kind with literal statues and foreign altars. That feels distant, historical, safely in the past. But Isaiah chapter 1 is not about foreign gods. It is about a people whose hearts have drifted from the God they are still correctly naming in their prayers. The word Isaiah uses for this kind of drift is rebellion, not atheism, not dramatic apostasy, just the slow, quiet, completely ordinary process by which a community keeps the forms of faith while losing the substance of it. Teaching 2 follows in the same breath, and it is the one that makes teaching 1 permanent. The prophetic word does not primarily predict. It exposes. Isaiah is not standing in Jerusalem to tell people what will happen next. He is standing there to tell them what is already true about themselves, that they have not been willing to see. Every generation that has ever read Isaiah has had to sit with this. The prophet does not arrive to tell you about the future. He arrives to tell you the truth about right now. That is teaching 2. The ox knows its owner. Does the worshipper? Isaiah does not tell Judah to stop praying. He does not tell them to abandon the temple. He tells them to open their eyes to the gap between what their mouths are saying and what their lives are showing. And he begins where every honest conversation about faith has to begin. Not with the spectacular failure, with the ordinary drift. The city is at prayer, and God is filing a lawsuit. And the most uncomfortable part of that image is not the lawsuit. It is the prayer continuing right through it. Isaiah is not a weapon you aim at someone else with that question. He is a mirror, and the only way to survive standing in front of it is to be willing to look. There is a passage in Isaiah that most preachers do not read out loud in its entirety. Not because it is obscure, not because it is theologically complicated, but because it is too direct, too uncomfortable, too difficult to soften into something a congregation can receive without shifting in their seats. It is Isaiah chapter 1, verses 11 through 17. And it begins with God saying something that should stop every religious person cold. What to me is the multitude of your sacrifices? I have had enough of burnt offerings of rams and the fat of well-fed beasts. I do not delight in the blood of bulls, or of lambs, or of goats. Read that slowly. This is not God speaking to people who have abandoned worship. This is God speaking to people who are worshipping constantly, correctly, and completely. The sacrifices are being offered. The feasts are being observed. The incense is burning. The prayers are going up. Everything the law requires is being done. And God says, I have had enough. Then it gets harder. When you come to appear before me, who has required of you this trampling of my courts? Bring no more vain offerings. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Sabbath and the calling of convocations. I cannot endure iniquity and solemn assembly. I cannot endure iniquity and solemn assembly. That phrase is one of the most jarring combinations of words in the entire Bible. Solemn assembly is the highest form of religious gathering. Iniquity is moral corruption. Isaiah places them side by side as if they have become the same thing, as if it is possible, not just theoretically but actually and practically, to hold a solemn assembly that is itself an act of iniquity before God. How does that happen? How does worship become something God finds unbearable? Isaiah gives the answer 3 verses later, and it is not what most people expect. He does not say the worship failed because the theology was wrong. He does not say the rituals were performed incorrectly. He says this, your hands are full of blood. And then, immediately after that condemnation, he says this, wash yourselves, make yourselves clean. Remove the evil of your deeds from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Correct oppression. Bring justice to the fatherless. Plead the widow's cause. The problem is not the worship. The problem is what is happening outside the worship. The people leaving the temple and going back into their daily lives are participating in a world where the vulnerable are being crushed, where justice is being denied, where the powerful are getting more powerful at the direct expense of the powerless. And then they are coming back to the temple and burning their offerings and expecting God to be pleased. God is not pleased. This is teaching 3. And it is the teaching that has an almost unique power to make religious people deeply uncomfortable, because it does not give anyone an easy exit. It does not condemn the person who never prays. It condemns the person who prays faithfully and then walks out of the sanctuary and participates, actively or passively. In a world where injustice is simply the background noise of daily life, Isaiah is not making a political argument here. He is making a theological one. He is saying that the God of Israel cannot be genuinely worshipped by people whose lives contradict the character of the God they claim to worship. Worship is not primarily a transaction between a human being and God conducted inside a sacred space. It is an expression of what a person actually values. actually loves, actually organizes their life around. And if what a person actually values has nothing to do with what God values, then the worship is empty. Worse than empty. It is an offense. There is a concept in Jewish tradition for this kind of religious failure: the desecration of the name. The idea that it is possible to act in such a way that the name of God, which you claim to carry, is brought into disrepute. Isaiah chapter 1 is a sustained description of a community that has managed to turn their worship itself into that kind of desecration. They are taking the name of God into their mouths every Sabbath and every feast day, and the lives surrounding that worship are making the name smaller, not larger. Now here is where teaching 3 becomes genuinely dangerous for any reader in any century. It would be comfortable to read Isaiah 1 as a condemnation of someone else, of a different era, of a people who were obviously failing in ways that we are not. But Isaiah himself will not allow that comfort. The people he is addressing are not pagans. They are not obvious hypocrites who know they are faking it. They are the faithful, the ones who show up, the ones who know the liturgy, the ones who would be genuinely offended if you told them their worship was an abomination. That is precisely who Isaiah is talking to. And this is where teaching 4 arrives. It is quieter than teaching 3, but it cuts deeper. It is a lie told to God in the most sacred language available. That is what empty worship is. In Isaiah's framework, not a failure of sincerity, not a lack of effort, a lie, spoken in the most solemn language a human being possesses, in the prayers, in the hymns, in the offerings, a community saying with its mouth that God is sovereign and good and just and worthy of all devotion, while saying with its life that what actually matters is something else entirely. Isaiah does not say this to make people feel guilty and stop attending worship. He says it because he believes that genuine worship, the kind that connects to the actual character of the God being worshipped, is worth fighting for, worth being honest about, worth the discomfort of asking the question that most communities of faith spend enormous energy avoiding. What is the gap between the God we describe in our worship and the God we actually serve with our lives? Where does our solemn assembly end and our ordinary week begin? And what happens in that ordinary week that we would never bring into the sanctuary, but that God sees with the same clarity as he sees our prayers? Isaiah does not answer that question for you. He just refuses to let you pretend it is not there. And he is not standing outside the room when he asks it. He is standing inside it, with the rest of us, looking at the same mirror. There is a man standing outside the temple. He is not inside because he cannot get what he needs inside. What he needs is justice. His land has been taken. The case went before the judges 3 months ago, and the judges ruled against him. Not because his claim was weak, but because the man who took his land had more silver than he did. The transaction that ended it was quiet and efficient and completely legal by every standard the court was willing to apply. Now he stands outside the gate. He can hear the singing from in there. He can smell the incense. He knows the schedule because he used to keep it himself, back when he had something to come from and something to return to. Isaiah walks past him, and then Isaiah looks back, not at the man only, at the temple and the man at the same time, at the singing and the silence at the same time, at the prayers going up and the case that was closed 3 months ago at the same time. And what Isaiah sees in that image, the man outside and the worship inside, is not 2 separate problems. It is one problem wearing 2 faces. This is the teaching that runs like a thread through every chapter of Isaiah. And it is the teaching that the modern church finds most difficult to hold in both hands at once. Isaiah chapter 1, verses 17. Seek justice. Correct oppression. Bring justice to the fatherless. Plead the widow's cause. Isaiah chapter 3, verses 14 and 15. The Lord enters into judgment with the elders and princes of his people. It is you who have devoured the vineyard. The spoil of the poor is in your houses. What do you mean by crushing my people? By grinding the face of the poor. Isaiah chapter 10, verses 1 and 2. Woe to those who decree iniquitous decrees, to turn aside the needy from justice and to rob the poor of my people of their right. 3 passages, 3 angles. The same thing every time. The society that crushes its poor has revealed something essential about itself. Not its policy failures, its theological failures, its failure to know and reflect the character of the God it claims to worship. This is teaching 5, and it is the one that refuses to stay in the category where most people try to put it. Most communities of faith are comfortable treating concern for the poor as a moral value, something admirable and encouraged, a quality that good people cultivate alongside their other virtues. Isaiah is not doing that. He is doing something considerably more radical. He is saying that the treatment of the poor is a diagnostic tool. It is the thermometer Isaiah uses to take the spiritual temperature of an entire civilization. Think about what that means in practice. In the ancient Near East, as in most of human history, the prosperity of the powerful was interpreted as evidence of divine favor. The gods blessed the strong. The weak were weak because the gods had not blessed them. This was simply the order of things. Isaiah inverts that entirely. In Isaiah's theology, the treatment of the weak is not a consequence of divine favor or disfavor. It is a test of whether the community has understood who God is at all. Because the God Isaiah serves is specifically and repeatedly identified as the God who defends the fatherless, who pleads the cause of the widow, who hears the cry of the poor. To worship that God while grinding the face of the poor is not just moral failure, it is a profound theological contradiction. It is claiming to know someone while acting in a way that demonstrates you have never understood them at all. How a community treats the people with nothing to offer in return tells you what that community actually values. Not what it says it values. What it actually values. That is teaching 6. And here is where it arrives in the present tense with a force that is difficult to manage. The question Isaiah is raising is not primarily about government policy or economic systems, though it has implications for both. The question is about what worship reveals. He is saying that you can tell what a community actually believes about God by looking at how that community treats the people who have no leverage. The poor, the orphan, the widow in ancient Israel were the people with no political connections, no ability to reciprocate, no social currency. The man outside the temple gate, he had no leverage. The judges knew it. The man who took his land knew it. And Isaiah, walking past, sees in that gap between the singing inside and the silence outside the most honest theology that city has produced all week. Isaiah does not describe obviously cruel people doing obviously cruel things. He describes something more ordinary and therefore more pervasive, the slow, structural, often invisible process by which a society arranges itself so that those with power accumulate more of it, and those without power find their situation getting quietly. incrementally worse. While the religious life of the society continues on schedule, the temple stays full, the festivals stay full, and the man outside stays outside. Isaiah will not let that image go. He carries it from the first chapter to the last. He carries it through kings and empires and exile and return. He carries it because the God he serves, the one on the throne, surrounded by fire and singing seraphim, has never stopped carrying it either. The question is not whether we find it in Isaiah, it is whether we are willing to look up from the page long enough to see who is standing outside our own gates. Isaiah is patient about that question. He has been asking it for a very long time, but he has never once stopped asking it, because the answer to it, more than any doctrinal statement, more than any liturgical correctness, tells you something true about who a community believes God actually is. There is a moment in Isaiah chapter 6 that almost never gets preached the way it actually reads. Most people know the broad outlines. Isaiah has a vision. He sees God on a throne. There are angelic beings called seraphim. They are singing. The famous words go up, holy. Holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. It is majestic. It is transcendent. It is the kind of passage that gets set to music and sung in cathedrals and used as the opening of worship services, where the goal is to create a sense of awe. And then Isaiah opens his mouth, and what he says is not worship. What he says is, "Woe is me, for I am lost." That word in Hebrew, the word translated as lost or ruined or undone, depending on which version you are reading, is a word used elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible for a city that has been destroyed, for a people who have been obliterated. Isaiah does not say, "I am overwhelmed." He does not say, "I am humbled." He says something closer to, "I am finished." I am undone at the most fundamental level. Being in the presence of what I am now seeing should not be survivable for someone like me. This is the reaction of a man who has spent his life talking about God, thinking about God, writing about God. A man who by any reasonable standard is one of the most spiritually serious people in his generation. And his first response to actually encountering the holiness of God is not reverence, it is collapse. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Why the lips specifically? Because lips are what Isaiah uses. His whole ministry is built on the words he speaks, the messages he carries, the proclamations he makes in the name of God. And in this moment, face to face with the actual holiness of God, he understands something that all his years of prophecy have not fully taught him, that even the best words he has, even the most careful and faithful language he brings to the task of speaking about God, is inadequate in a way that goes all the way down. It is not that he has said wrong things. It is that he is a creature standing before the uncreated, a finite thing standing before the infinite. And the gap between those two realities is not something eloquence can bridge. Now we need to stop here and talk about what holiness actually means in the Hebrew Bible, because the word has been domesticated in ways that Isaiah chapter 6 simply will not support. In contemporary religious language, holiness usually means moral purity. To be holy is to be good, to be clean, to avoid the things that would corrupt you. There is truth in that, but it is not where the word starts. The Hebrew word is kadosh, and its root meaning is not primarily moral. It means set apart, other, belonging to a category that has no comparison. When the seraphim cry, "Holy, holy, hoy," they are not saying God is very, very good in the way we mean good. They are saying God is in a class entirely by himself. A reality so different from everything else that exists, that proximity to it is experienced not as comfort, but as danger. This is why the seraphim, these powerful angelic beings who exist in God's immediate presence, cover their faces. They are not being polite. They are acknowledging that even these creatures whose entire existence is oriented toward God, cannot look directly at what God is. The holiness is not merely greater than them. It is categorically different from them. And into that space walks Isaiah, a human being, a creature made of dust, carrying a ministry made of words. Teaching 7 is this: we take the glory and leave the terror. We take the majesty and skip past the undoing. Every generation of worshippers has learned to do this with remarkable efficiency. We have taken the vision of Isaiah 6, one of the most overwhelming encounters with the divine in all of Scripture, and we have set it to music. We have made it singable. We have turned the cry of the seraphim into a chorus that people can clap along to. And in doing so, we have preserved the beauty of the moment and quietly removed the thing that made Isaiah fall on his face. A church that has lost its sense of the actual holiness of God, that has replaced the terror of Isaiah 6 with a vague sense of the divine as primarily warm and affirming, has not just lost a theological concept, it has lost the thing that makes everything else in Isaiah make sense. The seraphim take a coal from the altar, a piece of burning fire, and touch it to Isaiah's lips. The thing that is unclean, the very faculty Isaiah has identified as the source of his inadequacy, gets touched by fire, not gently cleaned, purged. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for. Then comes the voice, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" And Isaiah, the man who seconds ago was announcing his own destruction, says, "Here am I, send me." This sequence matters enormously because it completely reorders the relationship between holiness and calling. And that reordering is teaching 8. In most contemporary thinking about spiritual service and calling, the order tends to go something like this. You get your life together, you develop your gifts, you reach a certain level of spiritual maturity, and then you are ready to serve. Holiness comes first as a kind of qualification, and calling follows once the qualification is met. Isaiah chapter 6 completely reverses that. Isaiah is not sent because he is holy. He is sent after he has been confronted with how deeply he is not holy, after he has been undone by the holiness of God, after he has been purged, not by his own effort or discipline, but by fire from the altar. The calling does not follow from Isaiah's readiness. It follows from God's initiative in making Isaiah ready through an encounter that Isaiah did not seek and could not have survived on his own terms. This runs directly against one of the deepest assumptions of modern religious culture. The assumption that the person best qualified to speak about God is the person who has most successfully cleaned up their own life. That credibility in spiritual matters flows from personal spiritual achievement. That the right response to an awareness of your own inadequacy is to go away and fix it before you come back. Isaiah's experience says something different. The awareness of inadequacy, when it is the real kind, the kind that comes from actual proximity to the actual holiness of God, rather than from comparing yourself unfavorably to some human standard, is not an obstacle to calling. It is the beginning of it. The person who stands before the holiness of God and says, "I am undone," is far closer to being useful to God than the person who stands before the same holiness and feels adequately prepared. Isaiah did not walk away from that throne room feeling inspired. He walked away with the smell of fire on his mouth and the memory of his own ruin still fresh enough to taste. He walked away knowing something he had not known before. Not just intellectually, but in his body, in the place where his words came from. That, the God he was speaking about, was not a larger version of a human being, not a more powerful version of the religious leaders he knew. Something categorically different, something that could not be managed or predicted or accommodated. Something that was either the most terrifying reality in the universe or the most liberating one, depending entirely on which side of the coal from the altar you were standing on. By the time you reach Isaiah chapter 58, a lot has happened. The Assyrian crisis has come and mostly passed. The warnings of the early chapters have landed with varying degrees of impact. Decades of prophetic ministry have gone by, and the people of God are still doing what the people of God have always done. They are maintaining their religious disciplines. They are fasting. They are going through the appointed rituals. They are, by their own account, seeking God, and they are frustrated. Why have we fasted, and you see it not? Why have we humbled ourselves, and you take no knowledge of it? That is a remarkably honest complaint. It is not the complaint of people who have stopped caring about their faith. It is the complaint of people who are genuinely confused about why their faithfulness is not producing the results they expected. They have done the spiritual work. They have denied themselves. They have gone through the disciplines, and God seems indifferent to all of it. Isaiah's response is one of the most direct passages in the entire book. Behold, in the day of your fast you seek your own pleasure, and oppress all your workers. Behold, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to hit with a wicked fist. Fasting like yours this day will not make your voice to be heard on high. Then comes the question that changes everything. Is this not the fast that I choose to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover him. Now here is what separates this chapter from what came before it. Chapters 2 and 3 were about worship and justice as theological categories, about the gap between the God being named in the sanctuary and the God being ignored in the decisions that shape daily life. Those chapters hit hard, and they should. This chapter is about something more intimate. It is about the person who has already heard those earlier warnings and responded by trying harder, by adding more spiritual discipline to their life, by fasting more carefully, praying more consistently, showing up more faithfully. The person who is not ignoring the call to be serious about their faith, the person who is responding to it with everything they have and discovering that something is still missing. Teaching 9 is this: spiritual discipline cannot create what only transformed love can sustain. You can fast with genuine sincerity and still be organizing your fast around yourself, around your spiritual progress, around the state of your own soul, around the experience you are trying to have with God, the breakthrough you are waiting for, the blessing you have been told will come if you are faithful enough. And while you are doing all of that, with genuine intention and real effort, the worker you underpay is going home to a family that does not have enough. The neighbor you have never spoken to is carrying something you could have helped carry. The fast is real. The sincerity is real. The gap between the fast and the life surrounding it is also real. Isaiah is not telling the people to stop fasting. He is saying their fasting has become a self-contained religious exercise, something they do in relationship with God that has no connection to their relationship with the people around them. Then comes the description of what God actually wants. And it is important to read it slowly because it is not what most people expect from a passage about spiritual discipline. To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to share your bread with the hungry, to bring the homeless poor into your house, to cover the naked when you see him. This is not an addition to fasting. This is fasting. This is what the spiritual discipline looks like when it is actually working. When it is producing in the person not just a heightened state of personal spiritual sensitivity, but a heightened sensitivity to the human being standing right in front of them who needs bread. Teaching 10 follows from that. And it is the one that ties the first 5 chapters together. The fast God chooses always has someone else at the center, never just you. Every spiritual discipline, every act of worship, every religious practice that Isaiah has been examining from the beginning of his ministry has the same test. What does it produce in you toward the person outside the temple gate? What does the prayer make you see that you were not seeing before? What does the fast make you capable of, that the comfortable version of your faith was not making you capable of? Because if the answer is nothing, if the prayer ends and the fast ends, and you return to exactly the life you had before, except with a slightly better spiritual resume, then Isaiah has a word for what you have been practicing. He has been saying it since chapter 1. He will keep saying it until the last chapter. And at the end of Isaiah 58, after the description of the fast God chooses, comes a promise that carries the weight of everything the first 5 chapters have been building toward. Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, Here I am. Here I am. The same words Isaiah used in the throne room when the fire touched his lips and the calling came. Now God is using them back. Here I am, responding to a people who have finally learned to ask from the right place. Not from a ritual disconnected from their lives, but from a life that reflects the character of the God they are asking. That is not the reward for the right spiritual technique. That is the natural consequence of a community that has stopped dividing its life into the sacred and the practical, and started letting the sacred reshape the practical from the ground up. Isaiah has spent 5 chapters building to this point. And now the turn is coming. Because everything he has said about worship and justice and holiness and spiritual discipline has been said inside a city that could hear something breathing from the north. Something large, something that was not going to be satisfied by better fasting or more careful prayers. The empire was moving, and when fear gets loud enough, every community eventually discovers what it actually trusts. Not what it says it trusts. What it actually reaches for when the army is at the gate. That is where we are going next. There is a moment when every civilization discovers the limit of what it believed about itself. For Judah, that moment arrived in the form of dust clouds on the northern horizon. Not a rumor, not a diplomatic warning delivered in careful language by trained messengers. Actual dust. The kind that rises when an army too large to count is moving across dry ground in a direction that has been decided and cannot be changed by anything Judah currently possesses. Picture what that felt like from inside the city. A mother in the market district hears a merchant say that Samaria is 3 days from falling. She does not know if it is true. She goes home and looks at her children and does not sleep. A government official in the palace district has been in meetings for 6 days straight, and none of the meetings have produced anything except more meetings. An old man who remembers when the northern kingdom was still standing sits outside his door in the evening and listens to the silence coming from the north, and understands that silence, in a way the younger people around him do not yet. The Assyrian Empire, at its height in the 8th and 7th centuries before Christ, was something the ancient world had never quite seen before. Previous empires had conquered and dominated. The Assyrians systematized it. They developed a deliberate policy of terror, not as a side effect of conquest, but as a strategic tool. The deportation of entire populations was not incidental to their military campaigns. It was the point: scatter the people, destroy the cultural memory, replace them with other displaced populations. And within a generation, the conquered territory belongs to Assyria as completely as if it had always been Assyrian. The northern kingdom of Israel, the other half of what was once David's united kingdom, is already cracking under this pressure. Within Isaiah's lifetime, it will be gone. Samaria will fall. The 10 northern tribes will be scattered. The thing that Isaiah's northern neighbors feared most will happen to them completely. Judah watches. And Judah makes the calculation that any community under that kind of pressure would make. You need allies. You need horses and chariots and military agreements with people who have enough of both to matter. You need the kind of earthly power that can plausibly stand against the kind of earthly power marching toward you. Isaiah watches all of this, and he says something that must have seemed to the political minds around him either naive or insane. Do not be afraid, and do not make the alliance, not because the threat is smaller than it appears. Isaiah is not telling them the dust cloud is not real. He is asking them a question that the dust cloud has made urgent in a way that comfortable seasons never quite managed to make urgent. What do you actually believe about who is in charge? That question lands differently depending on what you have seen. The political advisors around Judah see horses and chariots and military alliances and the practical arithmetic of power. They are not wrong that those things are real. Isaiah is not asking Judah to pretend the Assyrian army does not exist. He is asking Judah to decide what is more real: the empire that can destroy a city, or the God who was on the throne before the empire existed and will be on the throne after it is dust. And this is teaching 11. Fear reveals what a nation really worships. Not what it says it worships. Not what it puts on its temple walls, or its official seals, or its priestly robes. What it worships at the moment, when the dust cloud appears on the northern horizon, and the meetings have been running for 6 days, and the old man is sitting outside, listening to the silence. Because that is the moment when the architecture of actual trust becomes visible. Not the architecture of stated belief. The architecture of the decision being made right now. Under pressure, when the thing that feels most real is the army, and the thing that feels least real is the God who has been present in the liturgy every Sabbath for 300 years, but who has never shown up in a way you could count the horses. Isaiah has been saying since chapter 1 that the worship of Judah had drifted from the God being named to something else. Fear is the moment when that drift becomes undeniable. Because fear drives a community straight toward whatever it actually trusts. And if it runs toward Assyrian alliances instead of toward the God of Israel, it has told you more about the state of its faith than any amount of temple attendance could reveal. Every generation has its own version of that dust cloud on the horizon. Every generation has its own empire. Its own source of pressure large enough and real enough to reveal what is actually at the foundation of its trust. The form changes. The pressure does not, and neither does the question Isaiah is asking. Teaching 12 is what Isaiah says next, and it is the one that gives teaching 11 somewhere to go. Isaiah chapter 8, verse 13, the Lord of hosts. Him you shall honor as holy. Let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. The word for fear here is the same word used for the fear of the Assyrian army. Isaiah is not telling Judah not to fear. He is telling them they are fearing the wrong thing. The fear is appropriate. The object is wrong. Direct the fear you have been spending on Assyria toward the God who made Assyria. And in that reorientation, something changes. Not the circumstances, not the dust cloud, not the size of the army. What changes is the scale against which those things are being measured. Isaiah has been in the throne room. He has seen what is actually sovereign. And from that vantage point, the empire that is frightening, everyone around him looks different, still capable of causing damage, still real, but not what it appears to be when the only scale you are using is the scale of earthly power. Every generation has its own empire on the northern horizon. And every generation of people who claim to trust God has to answer the same question Isaiah was pressing into Judah. When the dust cloud appears and the meetings produce more meetings and the silence comes from the north, what do you actually reach for? The answer to that question is not a doctrinal position. It is not a statement of faith written down and affirmed. It is what you actually do in the next 6 hours. Isaiah knew Judah's answer before they gave it. He knew because he had watched the drift for years. He had seen the gap between the God being named and the God being trusted, growing wider with every season of prosperity and every season of fear alike. He kept speaking anyway, because the question is never finished, and the God who asked it through Isaiah is still asking it. Ahaz is one of the most psychologically interesting figures in the entire book of Isaiah. And not because he is a monster. That would be easier. Monsters are simple. You identify them, condemn them, move on. Ahaz is not a monster. Ahaz is something considerably more familiar and therefore considerably more unsettling. He is a man who has already made up his mind about where he is putting his trust, and who performs the language of faith while acting from a place of complete practical faithlessness. Watch what happens in Isaiah chapter 7. The political situation is acute. 2 neighboring kings, the king of Syria and the king of the northern Israelite kingdom, are trying to pressure Judah into joining an anti-Assyrian coalition. If Judah refuses, they are threatening to invade from the north and install a new king who will cooperate. The situation is about as urgent as a political situation can get. Ahaz, king of Judah, is inspecting the city's water supply, almost certainly preparing for a siege. Isaiah walks out to meet him, with his son, whose name means a remnant shall return. Isaiah carries his theology with him, even in his children's names. And Isaiah says to Ahaz, in the middle of this crisis, in the presence of this overwhelming threat, be careful, be quiet, do not fear, and do not let your heart be faint because of these 2 smoldering stumps of firebrands. Smoldering stumps of firebrands. That is Isaiah's description of the 2 kings who are threatening to destroy Judah. Not because they are weak in any ordinary military sense, but because Isaiah is measuring them against a different scale. He has been in the throne room. He knows what is actually sovereign, and from that vantage point, the kings who are frightening everyone look like stumps, still capable of causing damage, but not what they appear to be. Then God, speaking through Isaiah, makes Ahaz an extraordinary offer. Ask a sign of the Lord your God. Let it be as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven. This is not a small offer. God is telling Ahaz, ask me for any confirmation you need. Name it. Deep as the grave or high as the sky. I will give you a sign that what I am telling you through Isaiah is true. And Ahaz refuses. I will not ask, and I will not put the Lord to the test. On the surface, this sounds like humility. It sounds like the kind of answer a theologically careful person would give. We should not test God. We should not demand signs and wonders. There is a tradition of religious caution about this kind of thing. And Ahaz is drawing on the language of that tradition to make his refusal sound pious. Isaiah does not buy it for a second. Hear then, O house of David, is it too little for you to weary men, that you weary my God also? The word Isaiah uses, weary, is the same word used elsewhere for exhausting someone's patience. Ahaz has not given a humble answer. He has given an evasive one. And the evasion is covering something that Isaiah can see clearly. Ahaz has already sent messengers to the king of Assyria. He has sent silver and gold from the temple treasury as a gift and a bribe. His message is, I am your servant and your son. Come up and rescue me. He has already decided who he is trusting. It is not God. The empire that is the source of everyone else's fear has become, in Ahaz's political calculation, his protection, his savior. So when God offers him a sign, Ahaz does not want one. A sign from God would be an inconvenience. It would complicate the arrangement he has already made. It would put him in the position of having to respond to divine action when he has already organized his survival around human power. The refusal to ask is not humility. It is a man declining an encounter with God because he has already found something else to believe in. Teaching 13 is this. The refusal to ask God is almost never about theological caution. It is almost always about having already decided. Ahaz is not an atheist. He is not a man who has rejected God in principle. He would be genuinely offended to be called faithless. He still uses all the right language. He still performs all the right rituals. He is, in the external categories that his culture uses to measure religious seriousness, a person of faith. But he has already sent the silver to Assyria. He has already made his real decision. And when God offers him a sign, the problem is not that Ahaz does not believe in signs. The problem is that a sign right now would require him to respond to what God is actually doing. And what God is actually doing does not fit the arrangement he has already made with the empire. He believes in God theoretically, and he believes in the empire practically. That is one of the most precise descriptions of functional faithlessness in the entire Bible. And it is precise not because it describes an ancient king in an ancient crisis. It is precise because it describes a pattern that is as available to any human being in any century as breathing. The language of faith carried by a life organized around something else. The prayer offered genuinely and then immediately followed by the decision that was already made before the prayer began. The theological vocabulary deployed with complete sincerity in the service of a trust that has been quietly placed somewhere other than God. Ahaz is not exceptional. He is familiar, then God. Because the story of this dynasty is not finished, even when individual kings fail it. Gives the sign anyway, not because Ahaz asked, despite the fact that Ahaz refused. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Emmanuel, God with us. This passage has a long history of interpretation across Jewish and Christian traditions, and it deserves honesty rather than flattening. In its immediate historical context, the sign addresses the house of David as a whole, connected to a specific political crisis, pointing to a child whose birth will be a marker in real historical time. Within Christian tradition, this became an ancient and deeply influential way of reading the passage as pointing beyond its historical moment toward Jesus. And the Gospel of Matthew quotes it directly in that sense. Both of those readings carry centuries of devotion and scholarship behind them. What is not disputed across any of these readings is the name Emmanuel, God with us. And that name is teaching 14, because it is the answer to everything Ahaz refused. Ahaz chose not to ask God for a sign because he had decided to trust the Assyrian Empire instead. And the sign that comes anyway, unrequested, unearned, arriving in spite of the refusal, is a name that says the thing you are trying to find in military alliance and political calculation: safety, presence, a power that will not abandon you. It was available all along, and it was not wearing an Assyrian crown. Think about the architecture of that moment. The king refuses the invitation. The sign comes regardless. The dynasty fails the test. The promise survives the failure because the promise was never dependent on the faithfulness of the king. It was dependent on the faithfulness of the God making it. That is either the most hopeful thing in this chapter or the most convicting, depending entirely on what arrangement you have already made, and whether the sign being offered right now is something you actually want to receive. The silver has already been sent to Assyria. The decision has already been made, and God is still standing there, offering a sign, speaking a name, Emmanuel. The word has never stopped being available, and the God it names has never stopped offering it to people who have already decided they do not need it. That is perhaps the most relentless thing about Isaiah's God. He keeps showing up anyway. There is a kind of hope that only makes sense after you have watched something die, not the hope that arrives before the loss. Not the optimism that says, maybe it will not be as bad as you fear. Not the hope that sits alongside the loss and tries to minimize it. The kind of hope Isaiah is about to describe in chapter 11 has a specific prerequisite. It requires that you have already stood at the stump, that you have already looked at what is left after the tree comes down, that you are not pretending the forest is still standing. To understand what Isaiah 11 means, you have to understand what has been lost by the time Isaiah writes it. The dynasty of David is the central political and theological fact of Judah's existence. It is not just a royal house, it is a covenant promise. God told David in 2 Samuel chapter 7 that his dynasty would endure, that there would always be a son of David on the throne of Israel, that this lineage was woven into the purposes of God in a way that could not be undone. For 300 years, that promise has held, through good kings and terrible ones, through military victories and humiliating defeats, through periods of faithfulness and extended seasons of corruption. There has always been a son of David on the throne in Jerusalem. We have just watched Ahaz be Ahaz. We have seen what the house of David looks like when it runs to Assyria with the temple's silver in its hands and calls the empire its savior. And Ahaz is not the last king who will fail this way. He is not the worst. The dynasty that was supposed to be the vessel of God's covenant purposes has been leaking for a long time. and anyone reading honestly can see where the trajectory is going. Isaiah has already said enough about judgment and consequence, and the gap between what God requires and what Judah is doing, that the cutting down of the tree is not a surprise by the time you reach chapter 11. What is a surprise is what chapter 11 says will happen after the cutting. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. Not from the tree. From the stump. The tree is gone in this image. What is left is the stump. The roots still in the ground. The wood exposed. The thing that was living now, looking like a monument to what used to be. And from that stump, Isaiah says, something will grow. Now, notice the reference. Not the stump of David, the stump of Jesse. Jesse is David's father. He is the man David came from, before David was anything. Before the anointing, before the throne, before the covenant. He is the field. He is the ordinary beginning before the extraordinary happened. He is the man whose sons Samuel inspected one by one until 7 had passed and the 8th was still outside with the sheep because nobody thought to include him. By going back to Jesse rather than staying with David, Isaiah is suggesting something important about what God is going to do. It will not be a repair of the existing structure. It will not be the dynasty restored to its former condition. It will be a return to the root, a new beginning from the original source. Not fixing what has grown from the seed, but going back to the seed itself. And what grows from the stump of Jesse will be different from what grew before. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him. The Spirit of wisdom and understanding. The Spirit of counsel and might. The Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. Every quality listed here is a quality that the kings of Isaiah's experience have conspicuously lacked. Wisdom, understanding, the fear of the Lord as a genuine delight rather than a performance. Isaiah has spent chapters describing kings who governed by fear of Assyria rather than fear of God, who sought counsel from political advisers and foreign alliances rather than from the Spirit of the Lord, who had knowledge of the strategic situation but not knowledge of the God who held the strategic situation in his hands. The shoot from the stump will not be a better version of those kings. It will be animated by something different at the root. Then comes the passage that has captured human imagination across nearly 3,000 years of reading. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, and their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. For the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Read carefully what Isaiah is and is not saying here. He is not giving a biological explanation of animals. He is giving a prophetic image of a world where predation is no longer the deepest law of existence. The wolf and the lamb lying down together is not a picture of the wolf becoming something it is not. It is a picture of a world in which the fundamental logic of domination, the deep structure of a world organized around the strong consuming the weak, has been undone by the knowledge of the Lord filling the earth the way water fills a sea. This is not escapism. Isaiah is not describing a fantasy world disconnected from the real one. He is describing the real world as it would be if what is currently most true about it. The reign of the Lord of hosts. actually became visible and operative at every level of creaturely existence. Teaching 15 is the one that lives inside that image and refuses to leave. Hope in Isaiah is never cheap. It never arrives before the loss, or bypasses the grief, or pretends that the tree is still standing when everyone can see that it is not. It comes from the roots, from the place below the cut, the place that was there before the dynasty and will be there after it, the place where Jesse lived before David was anything. The stump had to come first. The vision of chapter 11 is inseparable from the destruction that precedes it. You cannot have the shoot without the cutting. You cannot have the new beginning without the ending of what came before. Isaiah is not offering hope that avoids loss. He is offering hope that comes out the other side of loss and finds something there that could not have been found any other way. Teaching 16 follows from that, and it is the one that gives the whole image its theological weight. The shoot from the stump of Jesse carries qualities that no son of David has yet carried completely. Wisdom and understanding and the fear of the Lord as a genuine delight, and under that leadership, the wolf and the lamb lie down together. The earth becomes full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. This means the peace Isaiah is describing is not a peace achieved by eliminating the wolf. It is a peace achieved by the knowledge of God becoming so pervasive, so complete, so present at every level of existence, that the wolf no longer has any reason to devour the lamb. The violence was never just a behavior problem. It was a knowledge problem, a problem of what was known and trusted and organized around at the deepest level of creaturely life. When the knowledge of the Lord covers the earth, the way water covers the sea, the wolf does not need to be managed or restrained or eliminated. The wolf simply does not hunger for the lamb anymore. That is a vision of transformation that goes deeper than any political arrangement or military settlement or social contract has ever managed to go. It goes all the way down to the root, to the stump of Jesse, to the place where the ordinary began before the extraordinary happened. And the child shall lead them, not a king with horses and chariots, not a diplomat with alliances. A child, in a world where the cobra's den is a safe place to put your hand. This is teaching 16, held to the light. The new thing God is building does not look like the old thing repaired. It looks like something growing from a place where the old thing used to be. And if you are standing at a stump right now, if you are looking at what is left after something you thought was permanent came down, Isaiah has a word for what is happening in the ground beneath your feet. Something is already beginning. You just have to look for the green. Isaiah chapter 30. Woe to the rebellious children, declares the Lord, who carry out a plan, but not mine, and who make an alliance, but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin, who set out to go down to Egypt, without asking for my direction, to take refuge in the protection of Pharaoh and to seek shelter in the shadow of Egypt. By the time we reach chapter 30, something important has shifted. Ahaz is gone. His son Hezekiah is on the throne. Hezekiah is, by the assessment of the books of Kings and Chronicles, one of the best kings Judah has had in generations. He removes the corrupted worship sites. He restores the temple. He re-establishes the Passover. He is, in the language of the text, a king who trusted in the Lord, so that there was none like him among all the kings of Judah after him, nor among those who were before him. And his advisors are negotiating with Egypt. Hold on to that. The drift toward Egypt is not happening under a corrupt king who has abandoned God. It is happening under the best king Judah has seen in a long time, surrounded by advisors who are making what seems to them like the most responsible possible decision given the circumstances. The Assyrian threat under Sennacherib is not smaller than it was under Tiglath-Pileser III. It is larger. It is more immediate. It is more terrifying. And Egypt has horses and chariots. Egypt has military capacity. Egypt is the obvious answer to an obvious problem. A powerful neighbor who has reason to resist Assyria expansion, who has resources Judah does not have, who can provide the kind of earthly security that the situation seems to demand. Isaiah looks at this and uses the word woe, the same word he used when he stood in the throne room and realized his own undoing, the same word that introduces his oracles of judgment against the nations. Then he gives the reason in a sentence that is almost unbearably simple. The Egyptians are men, and not God, and their horses are flesh, and not spirit. That is the entire theological argument. The Egyptians are real. Their horses are real. Their military capacity is real. Isaiah is not denying any of it. He is just naming what they are. They are human. They are flesh. They are not God. They are not spirit. This seems almost too simple to be a serious argument. Of course, the Egyptians are not God. Everyone in that room knows that. The advisors who are negotiating the alliance know that. They are not confused about the metaphysics. They are making a practical political decision based on an assessment of available resources. Isaiah's response is not to deny the practical value of horses and chariots. It is to ask what is actually happening at the level of trust when you make that decision. Not on the surface. Not in the diplomatic language of treaty negotiations. At the level of what you are actually reaching for. What you are actually believing in. What you are actually organizing your security around. And teaching 17 is this. Every generation has its Egypt. We have our version of Egyptian horses. They have better names now. Hedge funds, political alliances, institutional credibility, the right connections in the right places, the platform large enough to protect you, the coalition powerful enough to matter, the earthly arrangement that can actually help when the empire is at the door. None of those things are bad in themselves. The horses were not bad. Egypt was not evil for having them. The advisors were not stupid for noticing them. The problem was not the horses. The problem was that looking to the horses had replaced looking to the Holy One of Israel. The consultation with Egyptian military strategists had replaced consulting God. Practical wisdom had become, quietly and completely, the only wisdom being sought. God has not been rejected in principle. God has just become functionally irrelevant to the actual decision-making. And then Isaiah says something that most people who preach this passage skip. In returning and rest, you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength. In returning and rest. This is not passivity. This is not the counsel of someone who does not understand the threat. Isaiah understands the threat better than the advisors do, precisely because he is measuring it against the right scale. Returning means turning back toward the God who was abandoned in the rush to find something more immediately useful. Rest means the kind of settled confidence that comes not from having solved the problem, but from having placed it in the hands of someone who can. Quietness and trust. In the face of an empire that rules through terror and noise and the deliberate spread of fear, the answer is quietness. Not the quietness of denial. The quietness of someone who knows who is actually in charge. Then, one of the saddest lines in the entire book, But you were unwilling. 3 words. The counsel was available. The way was clear. The promise was real. And they chose Egypt. Now, here is what Isaiah does next. And it matters more than most people realize. He does not stop at the condemnation. Teaching 18 is what comes after the unwillingness. And it is the teaching that keeps this from being just another prophetic indictment. Therefore the Lord waits to be gracious to you. And therefore he exalts himself to show mercy to you. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait for him. The Lord waits to be gracious, even after the unwillingness, even after the choice of Egypt over trust. Not because the choice does not matter. It matters terribly. It always does. But judgment is not the only thing God is capable of holding. Even after Judah sends its advisors south with the diplomatic paperwork and the strategic calculations and the entirely reasonable decision to trust the horses, God is described not as finished with them, but as waiting, positioned to extend grace the moment the people are ready to receive it. Patient. Still there. This sequence, the clear warning, the stubborn choice of Egypt, and then God waiting with grace already prepared, is one of the most revealing pictures of God in all of Isaiah. It is the picture of a God who is not surprised by the choice of Egypt, who knows what his people will choose when they are frightened, who has watched them make this choice in various forms across every generation of their existence, and who is still there on the other side of it, not with punishment ready first, with grace. The teaching is not complicated, but it is demanding. When the pressure is real and the horses are visible and the God who is supposed to be enough feels slow and abstract and not particularly equipped with cavalry. The temptation is not to abandon faith entirely. The temptation is to add Egypt to it, to keep the liturgy and add the alliance, to keep the prayers and secure the backup plan, to say yes to God and also to Pharaoh, just in case. Isaiah names that with the word woe, but he names the God waiting on the other side of that choice with the word grace. And that is not a small thing. In a book that has spent 30 chapters describing the consequences of the drift between stated faith and actual trust, the image of a God who waits to be gracious even after you sent the horses south is one of the most important things Isaiah has said so far. It will not be the last important thing, he says. The chapter after this one is where Isaiah finds out whether anyone in Jerusalem is willing to find out what the God who waits to be gracious actually does when someone finally asks. There is a moment in the life of Hezekiah that does not get enough attention. Not the moment of his illness, though that is remarkable. Not the moment when God adds 15 years to his life, though that is extraordinary. The moment that deserves more attention than it usually gets is a quieter one. A man alone in a room, a letter in his hands, and a decision about what to do with it. To understand what makes this moment so significant, you have to understand what the letter says. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, has already done to the rest of Judah what everyone feared he would do. The account in Isaiah 36 and 37 records that Sennacherib came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. The Assyrian records themselves, which survive and have been studied by historians, describe the capture of 46 walled cities and the confinement of Hezekiah in Jerusalem. In the Assyrian king's own words, like a bird in a cage. That phrase is from Sennacherib's own inscription, a bird in a cage. Jerusalem is still standing, but everything around it is gone. The countryside has been stripped. The fortified cities that were supposed to provide the defensive depth of the kingdom have fallen one by one, and an Assyrian field commander called the Rabshakeh has been sent to the walls of Jerusalem to deliver a message. The Rabshakeh's speech is a masterpiece of psychological warfare. He addresses the people on the walls directly, in their own language, over the heads of Hezekiah's officials who ask him to speak in Aramaic so the common people cannot understand. He wants the people to hear. He has things to say to Jerusalem that he does not want filtered through their leaders. Do not let Hezekiah deceive you. Do not let him make you trust in the Lord by saying, "The Lord will deliver us." Has any god of any nation ever delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? Who among all the gods of the lands have delivered their lands out of my hand? That the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand. This is not a military argument. This is a theological one. Sennacherib, through his representative, is making the case that the God of Judah is simply one more regional deity who will prove, like all the others, to be incapable of protecting his people from the Assyrian machine. The evidence he is citing is the evidence of history. Every other city has fallen. Every other god has failed to deliver. What makes Jerusalem think it will be different? It is, in its way, a genuinely difficult argument to answer. Because the evidence is real, the officials of Hezekiah come back to him with their clothes torn, the ancient Near Eastern sign of grief and extremity. They report what was said. And then Hezekiah does something that separates him from almost every other king in the narrative of Isaiah. He goes to the temple. He spreads the letter out before God. A man, a letter, and a floor. That is the whole scene. No army, no alliance, no backup plan being quietly activated while the prayer is being offered. Just the letter, spread out in the presence of God, and a king who has run out of other options and discovered that the end of other options is not necessarily the end of the story. And Hezekiah prays. The prayer is not long. It is not technically complex. What it is honest. It begins with acknowledgement of who God actually is. O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God. You alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth, you have made heaven and earth. He is not beginning with his need. He is beginning with who he is talking to, orienting himself before he makes his request, placing himself in the correct relationship to the God he is approaching. The God who made heaven and earth, not a tribal deity, not a regional power. The one who was on the throne before Sennacherib was born and will be on the throne after Assyria is dust. Then he names the situation honestly. Truly, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste all the nations and their lands, and have cast their gods into the fire, for they were not gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they were destroyed. He is not arguing with the Rabshakeh's evidence. He is accepting it. Yes, the other gods fell. Yes, the other cities were destroyed. But Hezekiah gives a reason for that which the Rabshakeh has not considered. Those gods fell because they were not actually gods. They were wood and stone. And of course, the Assyrian army destroyed them, because the Assyrian army is perfectly capable of destroying wood and stone. The question being implied, but not quite stated, is what happens when you bring that army against a God who is not wood and stone. Then the request. So now, O Lord our God, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are the Lord. Save us, not so that we can be comfortable, not so that we can return to business as usual, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are the Lord. Hezekiah is placing his personal survival inside a larger theological purpose. The deliverance he is asking for is not private. It is meant to say something to Sennacherib and to every nation watching what Sennacherib does. Something that the destruction of the other cities and the other gods could not say. And then Isaiah sends word to Hezekiah, "Because you have prayed to me concerning Sennacherib, king of Assyria, I have heard. I have heard." 3 words that carry the weight of everything that has happened in the chapters leading up to this moment. Every warning about alliances and Egypt and the unwillingness to trust. Every description of what genuine faith looks like when the empire is at the door. Every teaching about the God who waits to be gracious. All of it arrives in those 3 words. I have heard. Teaching 19 is the image itself, not the theological argument around it. The image. A man spreads a threatening letter on the floor of a room and talks to God about it. That is the whole thing. That is the entirety of what Hezekiah does in this moment that separates this chapter from every other chapter in the story of Judah's kings. He takes the most overwhelming piece of evidence for the futility of faith, the Rabshakeh's speech, the historical record of every god that has already failed, the bird in a cage, reality of his situation. And he brings it into the presence of God and says, "You see this? You hear this? You alone are the Lord." He does not hide the letter. He does not pretend. The letter does not say what it says. He does not manage the optics of the situation by keeping the worst of it away from God, as if God has not already read it. He spreads it out. Here it is, all of it, in your presence. What do you do with this? That is faith operating at the level Isaiah has been describing since chapter 1. Not the faith that maintains religious observance while organizing actual trust elsewhere. Not the faith that sends the silver to Assyria and keeps the prayers as a secondary strategy. The faith that, when every other option has been exhausted and the letter is in your hands and the city is surrounded, takes the letter to the room and spreads it on the floor. The response that follows strips away every pretension of the empire. God speaks directly to Sennacherib through Isaiah. Whom have you mocked and reviled? Against whom have you raised your voice and lifted your eyes to the heights? Against the Holy One of Israel. The Rabshakeh's speech, the sophisticated psychological operation designed to destroy Jerusalem's faith, is being addressed directly. Sennacherib has not been fighting cities and their local gods. He has, without knowing it, been raising his voice against the Holy One of Israel, the one whose holiness Isaiah saw in chapter 6, the one before whom the seraphim cover their faces. What happens next is brief and extraordinary. The Assyrian army does not take Jerusalem. Sennacherib's own annals, which boast of 46 cities captured and enormous numbers of people deported, do not record the capture of Jerusalem. Because Jerusalem was not captured, the inscription trails off. The campaign ends without the conquest it was building toward. The bird in the cage is still in Jerusalem, still alive, still on the throne. Teaching 20 is what this moment teaches about prayer, and it is not what the prosperity gospel has made of it. Hezekiah did not pray a formula. He did not pray a prayer that followed the correct sequence of praise and confession and petition and thanksgiving. He took a letter that said God would fail and spread it on the floor and said, "Here it is. You alone are the Lord." That is not a technique. That is a man who has reached the end of what human arrangement can provide and discovered that the end of human arrangement is not the end of the story. And the God who waited to be gracious through all the Egypt negotiations, through all the times Judah chose horses over trust, that God heard. Not because Hezekiah was perfect. He was not. The chapters following his deliverance record failures of pride and judgment that have significant consequences for the generations after him. But because a man spread a threatening letter on the floor of a room and prayed an honest prayer to the God who made heaven and earth, and that was enough. That prayer has never had an expiration date. The letter you are holding right now, whatever it says, whatever evidence it presents for the futility of trusting God in your specific situation, has an address. It can be taken to. The room is still open. The floor is still available. And the God who said, "I have heard," to Hezekiah in Jerusalem, in the middle of the Assyrian siege, is still in the hearing business. 20 teachings in, and we have been in the world of kings and empires and armies and political calculations and one man on a temple floor with a letter in his hands. Now the world changes. Not because the threats disappear. They do not. Not because the questions get easier. They do not. But because Isaiah, who has spent the first 39 chapters of his book speaking into one kind of crisis, is about to speak into a different one that has already happened, one that cost everything, one that left a people sitting in the ruins of everything they thought God had promised them, and asking the question that sits underneath all the other questions. Is God still there? When Jerusalem has fallen, and the temple is rubble, and the people are walking to Babylon, and the whole architecture of what faith was supposed to look like has collapsed into ash. What does Isaiah have to say? That is where we are going. And what he says there is the most important thing he has said yet. There is a shift in Isaiah chapter 40 that is one of the most dramatic transitions in all of prophetic literature. Everything before it has been dominated by warning, indictment, and the long-sustained argument that Judah has been choosing the wrong things and trusting the wrong powers. The dominant key of the first 39 chapters is minor. It is the key of consequence and difficult truth that cannot be softened into something comfortable. Then chapter 40 opens. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. The repetition is deliberate. In Hebrew, the doubling of a word is a way of intensifying it, of saying not just the thing, but the thing with full force. It is not a tentative comfort or a hedged comfort. It is comfort spoken with the full weight of the one speaking it. But before we let that word do what it wants to do, we need to sit with what has happened between chapter 39 and chapter 40. Chapter 39 ends with Isaiah delivering a hard word to Hezekiah. The treasures Hezekiah has unwisely shown to the Babylonian envoys. In a moment of pride, following his miraculous recovery from illness, will one day be carried off to Babylon. The sons who come from Hezekiah's own body will be taken. Hezekiah's response is one of the quietly devastating moments in the narrative. He says, "The word of the Lord that you have spoken is good, for there will be peace and security in my days." Peace in my days. As long as the catastrophe happens to someone else, in a future he will not live to see. Hezekiah is at peace with it. Then chapter 40. Comfort. Comfort my people. For many believers, the unity of the book of Isaiah is theologically important. For many scholars, the historical horizons within the book are also important. Noting that the world of chapter 40 speaks to people already in exile, already past the catastrophe, already sitting in the ruins. This video does not need to flatten either concern. It only needs to notice what the book itself does. It carries the reader from warning into exile, and from exile into comfort. And the comfort that arrives in chapter 40 is not the comfort that comes before the loss. It is the comfort that comes to people who have already experienced the worst. Not people being warned that the worst might happen. People for whom the judgment Isaiah warned about in the early chapters has already come, has already taken everything, and has left them asking whether what remains is enough to build a future on. To those people, God says, comfort, comfort. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem, and cry to her that her warfare is ended, that her iniquity is pardoned, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. Her warfare is ended. Her iniquity is pardoned. The judgment that was real, that was necessary, that Isaiah spent decades warning about, is not being minimized or pretended away. It happened. It cost what it cost. And now it is finished. The account is settled. The sentence has been served. And God is sending word ahead of the return, preparing the way before the people know they are coming home. A voice cries, "In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low. The uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together." Road building language. Ancient royal road building. The kind that was done when a great king was coming. God is moving through the wilderness. God is coming back to his people. And the preparation of the road is not metaphorical. It is the declaration that what seemed permanent, the exile, the distance, the silence, is temporary. The king is moving. Then something unexpected arrives in the middle of the comfort. A voice says, "Cry." And I said, "What shall I cry? All flesh is grass, and all its beauty is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades when the breath of the Lord blows on it. Surely the people are grass." In the middle of the comfort, this, a voice asking what to proclaim, and the answer being the frailty of everything human. The grass and the flower, the withering and the fading. Before the comfort reaches its full expression, it passes through an acknowledgement of impermanence that feels almost cruel in its timing. But it is not cruel. It is necessary, because the comfort that Isaiah is about to offer only makes sense in contrast to everything else that has been offered as comfort. The political alliances that withered, the military arrangements that faded, the great cedar trees of human power that were cut down and left as stumps. All of that is grass. All of it blooms and is beautiful for its season, and then the breath of God moves over it, and it is gone. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. That is the contrast. Not human comfort against divine comfort. Temporary against eternal. The comfort that lasts a season against the comfort that comes from the mouth that spoke the world into existence and whose words do not have an expiration date. Teaching 21 is this. True comfort only arrives after false comfort has been exhausted, not as a punishment, not as a test designed to break you, but because the comfort that comes from God requires a kind of receptivity that comfort from other sources tends to prevent. When the horses are available and the alliances are possible and the earthly arrangements are holding, there is always something that feels almost like comfort, but is not. something that manages the anxiety without actually addressing what is beneath it. The exile strips all of that away. The people sitting in Babylon have no horses, no alliance, no temple, no city, no earthly arrangement that could be mistaken for the thing they actually need. And into that complete emptiness, God says, comfort, comfort. The word lands differently in a room that has been emptied of everything else. Then the invitation, get you up to a high mountain, O Zion, herald of good news. Lift up your voice with strength, O Jerusalem, herald of good news. Lift it up, fear not. Say to the cities of Judah, behold your God. Behold your God. After the exile, after the judgment, after the grass and the flower, after the wilderness and the highway, behold your God. And then this, which is one of the most deliberate juxtapositions in the entire book. He will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom, and gently lead those that are with young. The God who made heaven and earth, the God before whom the seraphim cover their faces, the God who stretched out the heavens like a curtain and sits above the circle of the earth, that God is described here in the same breath as a shepherd gathering lambs in his arms, carrying them, gently leading. This is not sentimentality. This is theology. The insistence that the God who is utterly beyond human comprehension is simultaneously and without contradiction the God who is near enough to carry what cannot walk on its own. And then the passage that has been set to music in more languages than almost any other prophetic text. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might he increases strength. Even youth shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Even youths shall faint. This is the point. Youth, strength, vigor. All the things human beings normally rely on to carry them through difficulty. These things have a limit. They faint. They grow weary. They run out. And when they run out, the person who has been waiting for the Lord discovers that the strength they have been given is a different kind of strength entirely. Not the strength that comes from having resources. The strength that comes from drawing on a source that does not faint and does not grow weary. But they who wait for the Lord. Teaching 22 is the hardest one in this chapter to receive. The waiting is not the obstacle. The waiting is the curriculum. Every generation that has read Isaiah 40 has wanted to jump straight to the wings, to the renewal, to the running and not growing weary. And Isaiah will not let you skip the waiting, because the waiting is not a delay before the real thing starts. The waiting is where the real thing is happening. The exiled community sitting in Babylon is not waiting for God to finally show up. They are being formed by the waiting into the kind of people who can receive what God is about to do. The grass had to wither. The flowers had to fade. The horses had to prove insufficient. The alliances had to fail. Every false comfort had to be stripped away until what remained was the word of our God that will stand forever. And then the wings, not as a reward for enduring the waiting, as the natural consequence of having finally been emptied of everything that could have been mistaken for wings. This is the comfort of Isaiah 40. It is not cheap. It does not arrive before the wilderness, or skip the highway construction, or pretend the exile was not as bad as it was. It comes to people who have been through all of that and are still standing. Not because they were strong enough to survive it, but because they waited for the one who was, "Behold your God." That is the invitation. It was the invitation in the exile. It is the invitation now. And the God it is pointing to has not changed between then and now by so much as a word. There are 4 passages in Isaiah that scholars call the servant songs. They appear in chapters 42, 49, 50, and 52 through 53. They are among the most studied, most debated, most translated, and most quoted passages in the entire Hebrew Bible. They have been read by Jewish communities for centuries as a portrait of Israel itself, the people called to bear witness to God among the nations, suffering precisely because of that calling. They have been read by Christian communities for centuries as a portrait of Jesus, the one whose suffering accomplished what no amount of political or military power could achieve. They have been wrestled with by scholars across both traditions who find in them a depth that resists any single, final, fully satisfying interpretation. What is not disputed is this: these passages have haunted every generation that has read them carefully. Something in them refuses to stay safely in the past. Something in them keeps reaching forward, keeps finding new readers who recognize in the servant's description something they have seen, or something they needed to see, or something that names a reality they had no other language for. We are going to sit with the 4th song, Isaiah 52 and 53, because it is the one that pushes hardest against every assumption about what power looks like and what victory costs. Begin where the passage begins. Behold, my servant shall act wisely. He shall be high and lifted up, and shall be exalted. High and lifted up, exalted. This is the language of triumph, the language used for kings and conquerors. The servant will be raised to a position of supremacy that the text wants you to understand as genuine and ultimate. This is not a consolation prize. This is the real thing. And then the next line, as many were astonished at you. His appearance was so marred, beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. The one who will be high and lifted up first has an appearance so damaged, so disfigured, that he does not look fully human anymore. The exaltation and the disfigurement belong to the same person. Isaiah is not describing 2 different stages that can be separated and appreciated independently. He is insisting that they go together, that the path to the high and lifted up runs directly through the marred and barely human. This is not the way power is supposed to work. Chapter 53 continues with a description that has generated more commentary than almost any other passage in the Bible. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and as one from whom men hide their faces he was despised, and we esteemed him not. A man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, despised, rejected, hidden from. These are not the qualities that any ancient culture associated with divine blessing or divine favor. In the ancient world, as in most of human history, suffering was interpreted as a sign of disfavor. The gods blessed the strong. The gods cursed the suffering. If someone was despised and acquainted with grief, the obvious conclusion was that they had done something to deserve it, or that whatever power they claimed to serve had abandoned them. Isaiah will not allow that conclusion. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. We thought his suffering meant God had abandoned him. That was our interpretation, and our interpretation was wrong. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. The suffering is not punishment for his own failure. It is something being carried on behalf of others. The grief is not private. It is vicarious. The wounds are not the evidence of God's abandonment. They are the instrument of healing for the people who inflicted them, or who stood by while they were inflicted, or who simply benefited from what they accomplished without understanding what they were receiving. All we, like sheep, have gone astray. We have turned, everyone, to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Every one to his own way. This is the deepest diagnosis in the passage. Not spectacular sin, not dramatic rebellion, just the ordinary, universal, completely unremarkable tendency of every human being to organize their life around themselves, to turn to their own way, to make themselves the center of their own story. This is what the servant is carrying. The weight of every small self-centeredness, each one individually minor, collectively crushing. And then, the part that makes the passage impossible to read without stopping. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth, like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Silence, not the silence of someone who has nothing to say, not the silence of defeat, the silence of someone who understands what is happening and chooses not to interrupt it. The silence of someone who knows that the thing being accomplished through this suffering cannot be accomplished any other way, and who has accepted that at a level deep enough to hold the silence while the shearing happens. Now, here is where honesty is required about what is actually happening in the history of reading this passage. For Jewish readers across the centuries, the servant has been understood in multiple ways, sometimes as the prophet Isaiah himself, sometimes as a future ideal figure, most commonly and most powerfully as Israel the people, the nation that has suffered precisely because of its calling to bear witness to the one God among the nations. The exile, the persecution, the long history of a people misunderstood and mistreated by the larger world. All of this has been read through the lens of Isaiah 53 as something that has a meaning the world does not understand. Israel's suffering is not evidence that God has abandoned them. It is the suffering of the servant who carries something on behalf of the nations that the nations cannot carry for themselves. For Christian readers, the identification of the servant with Jesus happened very early and very completely. The New Testament repeatedly draws on the language and imagery of Isaiah 52 and 53. In the Gospels, in the apostolic writings, and especially in early Christian reflection on the meaning of the crucifixion, not as a tragedy, as a fulfillment, as the moment when the marred and barely human figure was doing exactly what Isaiah said the servant would do, bearing, carrying, being pierced, being crushed, and through all of that, accomplishing the healing that the wounds are said to achieve. Both readings are serious. Both readings have centuries of scholarship and devotion and lived experience behind them. What should not happen is the flattening of this passage into something smaller than it is by insisting that only one reading exhausts its meaning. What can be said across both traditions is this: Isaiah 52 and 53 describes a vision of victory that completely inverts the world's understanding of what victory looks like. The servant does not win by defeating his enemies in battle. He does not win by accumulating power. He does not win by removing himself from the suffering of the world and observing it from a safe distance. He wins by entering the suffering so completely, by bearing it so fully, by carrying it to such a depth that the suffering itself is transformed into something that heals. The exaltation is real. High and lifted up is the destination. But the road to it runs through the valley where the marred figure walks in silence toward the slaughter. Teaching 23 is this: God's victory looks like weakness before it looks like glory. Always. In Isaiah, in the servant, in the God who made highways in the wilderness and grew shoots from stumps and waited to be gracious while his people sent the silver south. The power that heals is not the power that dominates. The servant who is exalted is the servant who was pierced. And every community of faith that has absorbed this teaching has had to wrestle with what it means for how that community understands its own role in the world. Whether it pursues the kind of power that looks like the Rabshakeh at the walls of Jerusalem, or the kind that looks like the figure in Isaiah 53. The passage ends with something the opening could not have prepared you for. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many, and makes intercession for the transgressors, even at the end, even after everything, still interceding for the people who put him in the position of needing to intercede. This is the final picture of the servant, not triumphant over his enemies, praying for them, standing between them and the consequences of what they have done, still bearing, still carrying, still doing the only thing that could actually heal the gap between the people and the God they have been turning away from. Few passages in the Hebrew Bible have shaped the way suffering is understood, the way redemption is imagined, the way power is questioned, as deeply as these chapters. And the reason they keep doing that across centuries and traditions and languages and cultures is not because they are complicated. It is because they name something true, not merely true as a claim to be debated, but true in the sense that when you read them carefully, something in the human experience recognizes what is being described. The person who has borne something they did not deserve. The suffering that turned out to be carrying something larger than itself. The wounds that, inexplicably, became the source of healing for the people who inflicted them. Isaiah did not invent that pattern. He saw it. He named it. He wrote it down in language that has not lost a single degree of its heat in 2,700 years. And it is still burning. There is a Sabbath morning in Nazareth that changed the way the world reads Isaiah. The account is in Luke chapter 4. Jesus has returned to his hometown after his baptism and his 40 days in the wilderness. He goes to the synagogue on the Sabbath, as was his custom, and he stands up to read. They hand him the scroll of Isaiah. He unrolls it to a specific place, and he reads, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolls up the scroll, hands it back to the attendant, sits down, Every eye in the synagogue is on him. And he says, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." Today, not eventually, not in a future that requires further waiting. Today, in this room, with these people watching, what Isaiah wrote is happening. To understand what that claim means, you have to go back to where Jesus was reading from. Isaiah chapter 61. And to understand Isaiah 61, you have to go further back still, to the economic and social legislation at the center of the Torah. The concept Jesus is invoking when he reads from Isaiah 61 is the Jubilee. Leviticus chapter 25. Every 50 years in ancient Israel, according to the law of Moses, something extraordinary was supposed to happen. Debts were cancelled, slaves were freed, land that had been sold or forfeited returned to its original family. The entire economic arrangement of the society was supposed to reset. People who had fallen into poverty and lost their land, their freedom, their future, were supposed to get it back. Not because they had earned it back, because the year of Jubilee had come. There is significant scholarly debate about whether the Jubilee was ever actually practiced in ancient Israel at the scale the law describes. But what is not debated is that the Jubilee represented a theological vision of enormous power, the vision of a society in which the accumulation of disadvantage across generations was periodically interrupted by an act of structural grace, in which the people at the bottom were not permanently at the bottom, because the God who owned the land had built into the social order a mechanism for reversal. Isaiah 61 is written to a people in exile, a people who have lost everything that the Jubilee was designed to protect: land, freedom, home, future. Everything that the Jubilee law said should be periodically restored has been taken and has not come back. And Isaiah speaks to them in the language of Jubilee. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. I have been anointed to proclaim good news to the poor, liberty to the captives, the year of the Lord's favor." The year of the Lord's favor is the Jubilee, not scheduled for 50 years from now, not contingent on political developments or military victories. Announced, proclaimed, here, by the one on whom the Spirit of the Lord rests. This is not a spiritual metaphor for something else. Isaiah is speaking to people with actual poverty, actual captivity, actual broken hearts, actual grief. The good news he is proclaiming has their specific situation at its center, not their souls in some separated spiritual realm. Them, their land, their freedom, their mourning, their ashes. When Jesus reads this passage in the synagogue at Nazareth and says, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing," he is making a claim that is simultaneously theological and practical, simultaneously spiritual and material, refusing the division between those two categories that religious culture is always trying to maintain. He is saying the Jubilee has arrived. The year of the Lord's favor is now. And the evidence of it is going to be found exactly where Isaiah said it would be found: among the poor, among the captive, among the blind, among the oppressed, among the mourners sitting in ashes who need to be given a garland instead. The people of Nazareth, in Luke's telling, initially respond with wonder. They marvel at the gracious words. They say, "Is this not Joseph's son?" The local boy. They are pleased and proud and curious. Then Jesus keeps talking, and within a few verses, in Luke's telling, they are trying to throw him off a cliff. What changed? He told them two stories. The story of Elijah, who was sent not to any widow in Israel during a time of famine, but to a widow in Sidon, a foreign woman, and the story of Elisha, who cleansed not any leper in Israel, but Naaman the Syrian, a commander in a foreign army. Both stories are about God's grace going outside the boundaries of the expected community, going to the wrong people, the foreign people. That is what provoked the rage, not the claim that the scripture was fulfilled. The claim that the scripture was fulfilled for everyone, that the year of the Lord's favor was not exclusively the property of the people who already considered themselves inside the community of blessing. This is a pattern that runs through Isaiah in ways that the people who first heard Isaiah found equally difficult to accept. Isaiah's vision of the future is consistently and stubbornly universal. It is not a vision of Israel triumphant over the nations. It is a vision of the nations streaming to the mountain of the Lord, of Egypt and Assyria and Israel together being called a blessing in the earth, of a house of prayer for all peoples, the boundaries of the Jubilee. In Isaiah's vision, do not stop at the borders of the covenant community. They stop at the ends of the earth. This is the teaching that sits most uncomfortably with any religious community that has begun to understand God's favor as belonging primarily to itself. Teaching 24 is this, and it is the last one, and it is the one that ties everything together. The good news in Isaiah always has a specific address. It is never abstract. It always arrives at the door of the person with the least claim to it. The poor, the captive, the blind, the oppressed, the mourner sitting in ashes, the widow in Sidon, the leper in Syria, the exile in Babylon, who has stopped being able to imagine what home feels like. The favor of God moves toward the people with the least leverage, not as a secondary movement, not as an afterthought, once the real theological business has been transacted, as the primary direction, as the thing the Spirit anoints the servant to do before anything else. Good news to the poor is not the footnote. It is the headline. And the response of the people in Nazareth, the rage that follows when the grace refuses to stay inside the community that thought it owned it, is not an ancient reaction. That is not a first-century reaction. That is a very human one. And it has not gone away. Every generation has its own version of the Nazareth synagogue, its own version of the moment when the grace of God is proclaimed, and it sounds wonderful until you realize it is going to the wrong people too. Until the widow in Sidon shows up. Until the Syrian leper is the one being healed. Until the year of the Lord's favor turns out to be for the person outside the gate as much as the person inside it. Isaiah 61 began with a proclamation to exiles. It traveled through the synagogue at Nazareth, and it has arrived in every generation since, with the same question it has always carried. Is the good news actually good news to the poor? Or has it been quietly renovated into something more comfortable? Something that keeps the language of Isaiah 61 while gently relocating the address. Jesus read the scroll and said, "Today," Isaiah wrote it and said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." And somewhere between those two moments, and in every moment since, the question of who the good news is actually for has been the most important question any community of faith has had to answer. 24 teachings across 66 chapters. Not a list, a life, a ministry stretched across centuries of history and every generation that has stood at the edge of their own version of the crisis and had to decide what they actually believe. The question Isaiah leaves in the room is not about ancient Israel. It was never about ancient Israel. It is about you. In much of popular Christian imagination, The goal can begin to sound like this: get out. Get the soul out of the body. Get the body out of the world. Get the world behind you and the spiritual realm ahead of you. The physical is temporary. The material is passing away. What matters is the eternal destination, the place beyond this world, where the redeemed will finally be free from the limitations and corruptions and griefs of earthly existence. Salvation is, at its core, an exit strategy, a rescue from the material into the eternal, a departure from here to somewhere incomparably better. Isaiah chapter 65 and 66 will not support that picture. Not partially, not with some qualification that allows the picture to survive in a modified form. Isaiah's vision of the final future is so thoroughly material, so stubbornly concerned with the physical world and real bodies and actual geography, that reading it carefully requires a significant renegotiation of what most people in the pews have been handed as the Christian hope. Listen to what Isaiah says the new creation looks like. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come into mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem to be a joy, and her people to be a gladness. New heavens and a new earth. Not a replacement of the physical with the spiritual. A renewal of the physical by the power of the one who made it in the first place. The same Jerusalem, the same earth, made new, made right, transformed rather than discarded. Then the description that follows. No more shall be heard in it the sound of weeping and the cry of distress. No more shall there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not fill out his years. No more weeping, no more infant death, no more old men cut off before their time. This is not a description of disembodied souls in a spiritual realm. This is a description of people. Actual people with bodies that live and age, except that in the new creation, those bodies do not die young, and those people do not weep from grief. They shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. Build houses, plant vineyards, eat fruit, labor and enjoy the product of your labor. This is the direct reversal of every empire that has ever built its wealth on the dispossession of others. Every system that has ever forced people to work land they could not keep. To build cities they would be expelled from. To plant crops they would never harvest because someone more powerful had other plans for both the crop and the person who grew it. The Assyrian who deported 200,000 people and called it governance. The Babylonian who burned the temple and carried the vessels to a foreign treasury. The system that put the man outside the gate while the temple singers practiced inside. Every arrangement in which the labor of the powerless enriches the powerful and the powerful call it the natural order of things. Isaiah says that is what is ending. Not because people have escaped into a realm where those questions do not apply. Because the world that those questions tortured has been made new. For like the days of a tree shall the days of my people be, and my chosen shall long enjoy the work of their hands. Long enjoy the work of their hands. There is something almost startling about that phrase when you sit with it. The new creation is not a realm of pure contemplation or unending religious ceremony. It involves hands, work, the satisfaction of making something and being around long enough to enjoy what you made. The deepest human pleasures. The pleasure of craft and creation and labor and rest and community and the long enjoyment of what has been built are not left behind in Isaiah's vision of the future. They are finally, fully, permanently available. Then the animals, the wolf and the lamb shall graze together. The lion shall eat straw like the ox, and dust shall be the serpent's food. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, says the Lord. We encountered this vision earlier in the context of the shoot from the stump of Jesse. Here it returns as the capstone of the entire book. The predator and the prey, the wolf and the lamb, the lion and the ox. Together, the logic of predation, the deep structure of a world organized around the strong, consuming the weak, has been undone at the root. The serpent eating dust is a deliberate echo of Genesis chapter 3. When the serpent was cursed after the fall, dust was its food. Here, in the new creation, that image persists. But it persists in a world where the serpent's curse no longer extends to the rest of creation. The damage done at the beginning, the fracture between human beings and their Creator, between human beings and each other, between human beings and the rest of the created world, is being repaired. Not by escaping the creation that was fractured, by healing it. Now here is where this vision has enormous implications for how we understand what is at stake in the world right now. If the goal of salvation is to extract souls from a doomed physical world, then the physical world is ultimately irrelevant to the purposes of God. It is the container that will be discarded when its use is finished. The suffering of the poor matters only insofar as it affects the spiritual condition of souls. The man outside the temple gate is a soul to be evangelized, not a person whose situation reveals something about the health of the community's faith. The structures of injustice that Isaiah has been describing across 65 chapters are regrettable, but ultimately inconsequential. In the context of an eternal destiny that has nothing to do with vineyards and houses and the work of human hands. But if Isaiah is right, if the new creation is this world made new rather than a different realm altogether, then everything changes. The poor matter because their poverty is a contradiction of the world God is building toward. The injustice matters not just as a violation of abstract moral principles, but as a direct opposition to the trajectory of the new creation. The earth and its creatures and its systems and its beauty matter because they are not the backdrop of the story. They are the subject of it. The houses people build and the vineyards they plant and the children they raise and the work of their hands. All of it is the stuff of what God is making. And all of it matters to the God who looked at creation in the beginning and called it good, who has been working toward its restoration ever since, and who will not be finished until the wolf and the lamb are grazing together, and the sound of weeping is heard no more in Jerusalem. This is why the modern church finds Isaiah's social concerns so difficult to hold alongside its spiritual ones. If the world is going to be discarded, caring for it in any deep structural sense feels like rearranging furniture on a sinking ship. You might do it out of compassion or obligation, but you cannot do it out of hope, because hope, in that framework, points away from the world. Isaiah's hope points toward the world, always, consistently, from the stump of Jesse to the new heavens and the new earth. From the man outside the gate to the city where weeping is heard no more. From the worship that God cannot stand to the worship that emerges from a life so shaped by the character of God that the fast itself becomes the loosening of chains. Isaiah's hope is not an exit ramp. It is a renovation project, and the contractor has not left the site. Now here is where this teaching becomes most demanding for the present moment. Because the renovation is not yet complete, the new creation is a vision of the future. not a description of the present. The weeping has not stopped. The infant deaths have not ended. The wolf and the lamb are not grazing together outside your window. The work of most people's hands is not long enjoyed by the people who did the work. The distance between what Isaiah describes and what we can observe is enormous. And the question that distance raises is a practical one. What do you do with an unfinished renovation? Do you wait passively for God to complete it, treating the vision as a promise about what will eventually arrive without any participation required from you in the meantime? Do you try to build the new creation yourself through political action or social transformation or human effort, treating Isaiah's vision as a blueprint that human beings can implement if they organize well enough? Or is there a third way? A way of living inside the tension between the vision and the reality that is neither passive waiting nor presumptuous building. A way of orienting your life toward the new creation without pretending it is already here. Of caring for the world and its people and its suffering with the energy of someone who knows this world matters to God, while holding that care inside the honesty of someone who knows that the final healing belongs to God alone. Isaiah does not resolve that tension. He holds it. He has been holding it across 65 chapters of the most sustained and serious prophetic vision in the Hebrew Bible. He holds the judgment and the comfort, the indictment and the promise, the warning and the hope, the present reality of a broken world and the future certainty of a world made new. He does not offer an escape from the tension. He offers a reason to stay inside it. The reason is the God on the throne in chapter 6. The God who made the highway in the wilderness in chapter 40. The God who sent the servant to bear what no one else could carry in chapter 53. The God who waited to be gracious even when his people chose Egypt and then chose it again. That God is not abandoning the world. He is making it new. And the new creation is not a place to go when the world finally becomes too much to bear. It is what this world is becoming. Already, slowly, through suffering and hope and bearing and carrying and shoots from stumps and lambs lying down beside what used to be their predators, and a man spreading a letter on a floor, and a child being told to stand up because the year of the Lord's favor has arrived. Already becoming. Isaiah saw it from the 8th century before Christ. He wrote it down in language that has lost none of its heat. And he left it here, in these pages, for every generation that has looked at the world as it is and needed to be reminded of what it is becoming. Not an escape plan, a new creation, and it has already begun. Come back to the beginning, not the beginning of this video, the beginning of Isaiah's ministry. The city with the full temple calendar, the prayers going up, the sacrifices burning, the Sabbath observed, the feasts kept, a people doing all the things that religious people do, doing them faithfully, doing them consistently, doing them in the name of a God they genuinely believed they were serving. And a prophet walking into that city with a word from the throne room. You have heard him now. Not the safe version. Not the Isaiah of Christmas Eve services and Easter morning readings and the hymns that make the tears come without asking too much in return. The other Isaiah. The one who stood in front of a city at prayer and said God is not impressed. The one who watched kings choose Egypt over trust and named what they were actually doing. The one who saw the servant coming and could not look away from the wounds. The one who looked at the new creation and saw not souls departing for somewhere better, but a world being healed from the inside out. That Isaiah has been standing at the door of every generation since he first spoke. He is not standing there to destroy anything. He is not standing there with accusation as his primary posture. He stood in the throne room and was undone himself before he was ever sent anywhere. He knows what it costs to stand in front of the holiness of God and have the gap between who you are and who God is made visible at full brightness. He wept over Jerusalem. He wrote songs of comfort that have carried grieving people through the worst moments of their lives for nearly 3,000 years. But he will not be managed. That is the thing about Isaiah that every generation discovers eventually. He will not stay in the parts of the conversation where he is welcome. He keeps walking into the parts where he is not. He keeps asking about the people outside the temple, while the people inside the temple are in the middle of their prayers. He keeps raising the question of what the worship is actually connected to. He keeps pointing at the gap between the God being named in the sanctuary and the God being ignored in the decisions that shape daily life. He does not do this because he hates religion. He does it because he loves the God that religion is supposed to be pointing toward. And he cannot watch that God get smaller without saying something. Every generation of faith learns how to quote Isaiah safely. The Christmas Isaiah, the Isaiah of wings like eagles and strength renewed. The Isaiah of "Here am I, send me," read at ordinations and missionary commissioning services and moments of high spiritual decision. The Isaiah of comfort. Comfort my people. Read at funerals when someone needs words large enough to hold the weight of the loss. All of that is real. All of that is in the book. Isaiah is the prophet who writes the most beautiful comfort literature in the entire Hebrew Bible. He is the one who saw the servant coming and described the suffering in language that has moved people to tears in every century since. He is the one with wings like eagles and highways in the wilderness, and a new creation at the end, where the wolf and the lamb lie down together, and the sound of weeping is heard no more. But the comfortable Isaiah and the confronting Isaiah are the same person. The comfort comes from the same mouth as the indictment. The wings like eagles belong to the same book as your hands are full of blood. You cannot claim the comfort of chapter 40 without sitting under the weight of chapter 1. This is what it means to stop quoting Isaiah and start listening to him. It means letting the whole thing land. The chapter that makes you feel seen and the chapter that makes you feel exposed. The passage about the new creation and the passage about the fast God actually wants. The throne room where Isaiah is undone and the temple court where the worship has become noise. The stump and the branch. The exile and the comfort. The servant's wounds and the exaltation that follows from them. The year of the Lord's favor and the rage it produces in people who thought the favor belonged exclusively to them. 24 teachings. Not a list. A life. The truth about worship. What it is for and what it becomes when it loses its connection to the life being lived outside the sanctuary. The truth about power. How fear turns faithful communities toward Egypt. How the king who chose not to ask already had his answer. How the empire that looks unstoppable looks different when you have been in the throne room. The truth about hope. How it does not arrive before the loss, but through it. How comfort is real, but it costs something. How the servant wins, not by dominating, but by bearing. How the new creation is not an escape from the world, but the world being healed at a depth that no human renovation project could reach on its own. And the truth about this moment, whatever moment you are in when you are watching this, whatever the empire is that stands outside your city, whatever the Egypt is, that seems like the obvious answer to the fear you are carrying. Whatever the temple ritual is that you are performing faithfully, while the question of whether it is connected to your life outside the sanctuary sits quietly in the corner and waits. Isaiah is not standing at the door to judge you. He is standing there because he has something to give you that the comfortable version of your faith has not been able to give you. He has the truth about the God on the throne. The one who is not impressed by correct religious performance, disconnected from actual love. The one who waits to be gracious even when you choose Egypt. The one who carries through the servant what no human being could carry. The one who is making the world new from the roots up. From the stump of Jesse. From the place where everything looks finished but is actually just beginning. That God is not an easy God. Isaiah never claimed he was. The seraphim do not cover their faces in front of something easy. But he is a God who hears. Hezekiah spread a letter on the temple floor and said, "You alone are the Lord." And God said, "I have heard." The people in exile heard comfort. Comfort, and the word that will stand forever when everything else had withered. The mourners in Isaiah 61 received a garland for ashes and the oil of gladness for mourning. This God hears. This God responds. This God is still in the business of making highways in wilderness and growing shoots from stumps and sending comfort to people who have been through too much and giving wings to people who have run out of their own strength completely. Isaiah remembers the poor when the temple is full of smoke. Isaiah distrusts the power that does not answer to God. Isaiah refuses the worship that has nothing to do with justice. Isaiah sees the holiness as fire before he sees it as light. Isaiah sees hope growing from the place where the tree was cut down. Isaiah sees the servant wounded before he is exalted. Isaiah sees the nations healed, not merely defeated. Isaiah sees a new creation where grief does not get the final word. That is 24 teachings, not a list, a life. A ministry stretched across 66 chapters and centuries of history, and every generation that has stood at the edge of their own version of the Assyrian crisis and had to decide what they actually believe. The question Isaiah leaves in the room is not about ancient Israel. It was never about ancient Israel. It is about you. About whether the faith you carry is wide enough and honest enough and costly enough to hold the whole Isaiah, the comfortable parts and the confronting parts, the wings and the wounds, the comfort and the charge. He is still at the door. He is not waiting to be quoted. He is waiting to be heard. If something in this video reached a place that does not usually get reached, share it with one person before you close out. You already thought of someone while you were watching. Someone who needs the whole Isaiah, not just the safe parts. Send it to them. And if one teaching stayed with you, leave it in the comments. Not as a debate, as a witness, because wherever you are in this, someone else is standing in the same doorway, and that matters more than you might think. If this kind of long-form documentary on scripture and history is what you are looking for, subscribe. There is more coming. We will see you in the next one.